Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, depending on when you've tuned into this edition of Hypnosis Week Live. Now, you'll either be watching this on YouTube, Vimeo, or another video platform, or you may well be listening to the audio version on iTunes or your other favourite podcast platform. Whichever it may be, either under the little speaker symbol on the podcast, there will be the links to this gentleman's websites, social media outlets, YouTube, and all those kind of normal things. If you're on the video channels, look in the written description underneath. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to welcome to the show this week, basically one of the major names in the world of coaching and NLP, a living legend who has published numerous books. Bear with me for about 30 seconds. I'm not giving you the full titles. I'll be here forever. But books including the NLP Workbook, Leading with NLP, Free Yourself from Fears with NLP, NLP and Health Coaching with NLP, How to be a Master Coach, Introducing NLP. Absolutely bloody excellent book if you've no background in NLP. Great starting one. Successful Selling with NLP, Principles of NLP, Not Pulling Strings, Applications of NLP to Teaching and Learning Music, Training with NLP, another particularly good one if you've got no prior knowledge of NLP, NLP and Relationships, NLP and Health. I could go on. His most recent one from 2019 is Coaching the Brain, Practical Applications of Neuroscience to Coaching, which is co-authored with Andrea, and he'll tell me how to pronounce it, Lages, it's L-A, Larges, there we go. I apologise to her. As well as NLP, he's also the UK, he runs trainings licensed with permission, the official Paul Ekman Micro Expressions, which you may have come across if you've ever seen the Lie to Me television show. We'll talk a little bit about that later. He's won awards, including the Medal of the National Community of Leadership Institute in Singapore and a whole host of other things. In other words, when it comes to NLP and coaching stuff, he knows what he's talking about. So it's a privilege to welcome to the show, Josph O'Connor. How are you doing, sir?
Thank you very much. I'm doing fine, especially after that introduction.
Well, it's all true. It's all true.
When you're called a living legend, it makes me feel about 90, which is some years off that. Yeah.
Sorry, I did not mean it to have that.
No, just kidding.
So what got you here? What's your journey? What was your journey? Because there was a time when you weren't a coach, when you weren't involved in NLP or anything like this. What brought you to where you are now?
Oh, okay. How long is this lasting? Okay, quick version, or fairly quick version. I originally trained in music. I was a classical guitarist, and I played classical guitar, gave concerts, I taught. I was also in a rock band because this was the 60s after all, and everyone was in a rock band in the 60s. So I was doing a lot of teaching and a lot of performing on guitar, which was great. And the couple of questions that kept coming to mind was, first of all, well, how do you manage performance? Because you can play extremely well, but you get up on stage and all those people looking at you. And sometimes your skill deserts you. And this was particularly true when I was teaching, and I would teach some very good players. So they would come in, they would sit down, they would get their guitar out. I'd go and say, I'll get some glass of water or a cup of coffee. And I'd listen at the door, and they'd start practicing. And invariably, they would play extremely well. So then I come in, teacher arrives, sits down, looking stern, and play your piece, please. And almost guaranteed, it was much, much worse than it was when I heard it before. So what happens? Their capability is identical. It hasn't changed in a couple of minutes since I've gone out. I'm not a particularly scary person. So it's something going on in their head. It's the inner game. It's the inner opponent. It's, judgments, mental models, whatever you want to call it. And for concert players, most of my work as a teacher, guitar, was actually overcoming those sort of gremlins rather than teaching them anything technical, because they knew the technique. So, that was interesting. That's about performance. And it doesn't matter whether you're performing the guitar in front of people or on stage or giving a presentation or a training or anything like that. The dynamics are the same. You have to be able to manage that and to be able to give your best or better. So that was one question. And the other question was, how do you teach? I mean, how do you actually impart knowledge in a way that fits the other person, that they can understand it? And it was those two questions really that brought me to coaching. Well, to NLP first, and the book on teaching and learning music with NLP, Not Pulling Strings, which was my first book, and which I'm still proud of. And I do believe, the only book on music and NLP around.
I've certainly, when I was just checking up on your other book titles, I'd never come across one linked in that way, and I suddenly thought, oh wow, right. And I was going to ask you what was it about, but you've wonderfully read my mind and answered that, and it makes complete, total sense. I hate to slip in for viewers and listeners who maybe don't yet have any formal or any background maybe in NLP. You may be more in hypnosis or different modality names, whatever. In NLP, they talk a lot about changing people's states. It's the emotional state or mental state that they're in. And what came across, what you were saying there, is that without you there as Mr. Teacher, almost the stern teacher, but also the person they might slightly be scared of, because clearly he's better than me, so he's going to be judging, could set off all those negative states and feelings and emotions in them. And that's a book I think I'm going to have a read of, because my daughter's heavily into, I'm not musical at all, but my daughter's into keyboard, guitar, and a whole bunch of stuff.
Listen, if you can walk without falling over, and if you can modulate your voice, you are musical.
Okay.
Because what's music after all? It's rhythm and pitch, basically, manipulation of rhythm and pitch. So if you can do different voice tones, and if you can walk without falling over, in other words, rhythmically move, you're musical.
Well, thank you. That's a different reframe, as NLP will call it. Makes me think differently. However, it doesn't improve my voice sound on karaoke.
Okay. Well, that's something else.
So NLP, before it led into the coaching and stuff, and you've explained like what were your motivating triggers to go and seek out the answers to those questions. What route did you take when you started learning NLP then? Was it live training, and was it,
Well, yeah,
who was it with,
this is going back now to beginning of 1980s, when there really wasn't much.
So this was that was the embryo stage, really, wasn't it? Because it was 81 when Frogs into Princes, Bandler and Grinder was published.
Yeah. I mean, really, what you could say I got into NLP originally through a music workshop. I went to playing the guitar, right? There was a very interesting guy called Gilbert Biberian, who was a wonderful guitarist and very interested in the so-called psychological side as well, the performance side. And he used to give kind of small group gatherings, trainings for guitarists. And I was along there once, and he had a guest, David Gaster, who was one of the first people to set up NLP trainings in the UK. Not the first, but one of the first. He'd been out with Bandler and Grinder in the States. And he was talking all this about, matching and rapport and eye movements. And I thought this was fascinating. So I went back and I read everything that I could about it, which was about 3 or 4 books at that time. And then thought, well, this is clearly a full body sport. If I'm going to get interested in this, can't really do it from books. I shall have to go and do training. So I did several, and that kind of brought me into it. And on the basis that the best way to learn anything is to train it yourself, I got into training quite early.
Well, hence your prolific back catalogue of books, some of which are extremely big sellers and leaders in the field. I mean, two in particular I'll mention again. For anyone who's not got any NLP background or knowledge and wants to start looking into it, Introducing NLP, and the other one, Training with NLP. It's just my opinion, but Introducing NLP after that one, if you read the Training with NLP, even though you may not have had much in the way of real world experience of using what's in Introducing NLP, will give you another level of it. I think those two work really well together.
Yeah, I must just tell you that Introducing NLP was the first book, and it was a book put together for a big gap in the market, which was there was no book kind of bringing together all the tools and the ideas and even the bibliography, which was quite small in those days of NLP. So it was kind of overdue, meta view, if you like, of NLP. There just wasn't one. So that was the idea of that. It was published by Thorson's, and the original cover, I've got a picture of it somewhere. It was amazing. It was a picture of a kind of redwood forest in California, which I suppose is appropriate, with sunlight filtering through, and a girl looking very hippie with long hair, sitting on a kind of small flying saucer.
All right.
Floating in the air. This was the first cover when NLP was more like, they rebranded it a few years after as business, but this was when it was alternative stuff, weird and wonderful alternative stuff. So it would sit in that part of the bookshelf, and anyone picking up the book would go, oh, third age stuff. And then they rebranded it to a nice plain blue cover a couple of years later, and it went more into business. But that was the first one. But I've got to also mention, hold on, this one.
You've got a gas lift chair, I'm guessing, because
yeah,
you went down and up. Coaching with NLP.
Yeah, there we go. That was one of the latest, at least in NLP, coaching in NLP. But that was again a few years ago. But yeah, a lot of books. I basically wrote books on things I was interested in and wanted to learn about. So I didn't write books from the point of view, I know everything about this and I'm going to dump it on some pages so everyone else can find out. I thought of what am I interested in learning about? And then I would research it and try and write a book about it, on the grounds that if I did all the heavy lifting and spade work, then it was much easier for the person reading the book, because I started from the same position as them. And that seemed to work.
I think an important thing to remind viewers and listeners of it, because especially that you've just said, well, you decided what you were interested in and then sort out the research and the knowledge. But at that point, you didn't necessarily have the experience because you didn't know what all the knowledge was relevant to that particular area. But over the years, you most definitely have got experience in all the areas because you've been incredibly successful working in coaching of all different types of arenas, right up to big blue chip corporate companies and stuff. So I think it's important to stress that you've actually also been out there walking the walk, so to speak.
Oh yeah, I'm not claiming the imposter syndrome or anything like that. I'm just saying that that was the way I learned, and I enjoyed it very much. And in the research and the writing, I learned a lot about it, and then in the training, I learned more, and so it builds.
Now, NLP, and everyone has their own different perceptions, beliefs, opinions, and all that. So there's no right or wrong. These are not trick questions. It's just my view that NLP kind of, I know the techniques can be used, techniques, strategies, call them what you will, used in different contexts for different intended outcomes. But there tends to be a bit of a kind of a division now where there is NLP that's sort of therapeutic, and you have got books out how to, you know, overcome your fears with NLP. Classically, people are likely, even if they haven't got an NLP background, if they're involved in hypnosis, they're very likely to have heard of the NLP fast phobia cure or the swish pattern. And then you've got your business side, peak performance, motivation, state management, more what would I say is coaching. So it's kind of become coaching and therapy. Now, obviously, you've done both because you've got books in both areas, but it does seem that you've ended up doing way more on the coaching side.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a therapist, and I never considered myself as a therapist. I've been interested in. I mean, if you take full disclosure here, I don't do, as it were, NLP anymore. I use the insights that I got from NLP, which are extremely useful in coaching, because coaching is an area, a practical area, and a profession which you can use these sort of things together with of course, with other things. Now, if we define NLP, as far as it can be defined, at least the one I like, as the study of the structure of subjective experience, then you have, well, okay, you're studying it. There's a structure to it. It's not random. All the things that go on in your head are not random. There is a structure to it. Subjective, it's yours, and it's your experience. And from those, there are the three big ones, of course, which are goals, what do you want? Values and emotions, what is important to you, and what do you feel strongly about? And beliefs, or as I prefer to think of them, as mental models, ideas that we have about ourselves and the world, that we act as if they're true. And as long as they're more or less fit reality, then we get along. And as soon as we don't, we stub our toe on reality, and hopefully we change them. So those three, to me, are what are most important in NLP. And they're exactly, of course, what a coach deals with in any sort of context. So that was my journey through music, through NLP, through psychology to coaching, particularly business coaching, because I like to do that. And then more recently, filling in some of the gaps, I think, in coaching, which is the neuroscience bit. So I kind of like to see where the gaps are in what I'm doing, and then see if I can find out about them.
And then ultimately be in a position to provide something other people aren't. Initially, till you've written a book about it and then teach other people. Yeah. Then you're creating competition for yourself. But no. There's a phrase that people might have heard if they've stumbled across NLP but not yet dug into it, but do feel the need to go to the website below. There will also be a link to Amazon so you can go and buy Joseph's books. The map is not the territory. Can you explain what that phrase means to you in terms of what you do?
Oh, I don't think Korzybski ever said that, actually, although it's credited to him. Well, obviously, any representation that you can make of something else is not going to be that thing, and therefore it's going to be a model. It's going to be seriously, or, well, it's going to fall short of the real thing. So you could say that we live in the world. We have no idea what this world is really like. We have filters of what's out there, and the filters are our sense organs. In other words, we get information only through our sense organs, and therefore we only perceive what is allowed in through our sense organs, which then gives us some representation, some map of what's out there. And if the map is a reasonable one, then we'll be able to get along okay. And for the most part, I guess it is. Then when we start to use words and try to explain this to somebody else, then you've got a map of a map. And then you're even further from the raw experience. And this is where, of course, communication tends to break down very often.
Not a bit like Chinese whispers.
Yeah. Sure, it just doesn't work. So yeah, we tend to assume that not only the map is the territory. In other words, we are giving a first of all, we assume that we are getting a true, whatever that means, representation of what's out there. Secondly, we assume that we understand it. And thirdly, we assume that we can perfectly well explain it to somebody else. And I'm not sure about any of those three assumptions.
Cool. I've got my eyes occasionally look down people at home. That's because I've got bullet points and notes here to prompt my mind. You mentioned earlier your book, Not Pulling Strings, application of NLP to teaching and learning music. And you gave us a great example of how not being in the room, they could play better than being in the room, which obviously is different state of mind, body, emotion, thought, all those things. How does that cross over? I know it does, that's why I'm purposely asking you. How does that cross over into sort of coaching business people and in companies?
Well, we all have a brain, and the brain works much the same. So we're all prey to the way that we make our mental models, prone to fake news and wrong information. We have a lot of cognitive biases in terms of how we judge other people, ourselves, and the world. And those sort of things are true in every sphere. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're a guitarist on stage or whether you're a business person making a presentation to the board. You're likely to meet the same sort of challenges, which is very often they are judging me, I am no good, I don't know this, etc., etc., which is going to stop you from giving your best. So a coach is basically somebody who helps another person to find their best, to give their best in a particular context, which may be more or less challenging. Coach doesn't give suggestions, doesn't try to fix them, doesn't tell them what to do, but brings out from them their best resources. So I don't see any, I see this, with NLP is always about structure and not content, and coaching is the same.
So you're kind of helping the person in whatever context it is, business, personal, whatever, to generate or realize more options that could be open to them and choices, and then to help them choose a different path type of thing if what they're currently doing isn't working the best for them.
Yeah, the way I think about it is that when someone comes for coaching with a problem, I like to say that the problem is not the problem. The problem is how you're thinking about the problem. Okay. Because, the world is just the world, right? There it is, and take it or leave it. Now, when it becomes a problem, you are thinking about it in a particular way, and that particular way is causing some difficulty or pain or block or obstacle or whatever it is from what you want. So what a coach does, I think, is basically help the person to change the way that they are thinking about the reality, because you're not going to change reality, right? Mm-hmm. In the same way that somebody comes and complains about their boss or their spouse, a coach or anybody is not going to say, well, okay, let's change them and then everything will be okay, however much the client might feel that that's actually the answer. It's about how are you thinking about this? That's the issue. So then what you get then is a change of mental models, a change of a way of thinking, and an ability to get better information about what's going on, an ability to avoid what's often called a confirmation bias, which is that we tend to see and remember things that that basically reinforce what we thought already. Yeah? Whatever our ideas are, we notice all the confirmations that we read in the paper and other people say and come up on Facebook and everything else. And we tend to ignore or even just not notice at all those things that go against it. And this tends to set us very much in our world, which is why it's very important to have what I sometimes call in coaching going into alternate realities, which is, okay, let's suppose for a moment that there was another explanation to what you just said. Let's see what that is. And we're not saying you're wrong. We're simply saying, let's explore another alternate reality to the one that you've just presented, because it might be more interesting, might be more free. And then, yes, out of that different thinking, a client will find more choices, a choice which they had not thought about before because they didn't have the mental models to support it.
Kind of taking someone who's blinkered one direction, confirmation bias, as you said, and making them see them opportunities that were already there, but they were just blind to them, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the world is an amazing, complicated and fantastic place. And it's just, we see very, very little of it. And when we put our blinkers on, which we all have, it's just part of the deal, we see even less. So, you know, it's opening our eyes, it's opening our ears, it's opening our senses, and being open to what's there and not trying to change it. Well, not trying to change it in terms of what's there, you know, as somebody said, if you argue with reality, you'll lose 100% of the time. So it's not about you. Of course, we want to change things. We set goals and we try to achieve those things. But the magic is in the journey, and when we don't achieve them, then that's just the way things are. That doesn't make us failures or losers. It just makes it reality's gone this way and not our way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm just to try and kind of point this in a certain direction. If someone watching or listening to this was to go and get, let's say, introducing NLP and training with NLP, maybe even, you know, overcoming your fears with NLP, just to start off with, and they start to utilize some of the techniques that they'll learn within the pages of those books, a knock-on effect will be that they will arguably change their reality law, isn't it? Because they will be able to manage their states differently. They'll be able to overcome the phobia, for example, in which case their reality's changed. See where I'm...
Yeah, sure. The real, you know, we see, as they say, we see who we are, not what's out there. So yes, if you read anything, of course, I recommend my books, but certainly the brain is such that it's changing all the time. You know, when after this interview, your brain will be different, my brain will be different. After listening to this interview or seeing it, anyone who does so, their brain will be different, because the brain is a verb. The brain is constantly changing all the time in relation to the experience that it's presenting. So, and the brain will faithfully reproduce the habits that we continue to do, however stupid it might be. So, you know, if you have a mental model of, you know, I'm no good at playing the guitar, and you keep repeating that to yourself, and you, through confirmation bias, see all sorts of reasons why that's true, and you focus on every mistake, then your brain will faithfully strengthen that pattern in the nerve cell connections, and that will become your default way of thinking. And you know, we're very clear about physical habits. You know, if you want to get good at guitar, you practice, you play over and over again, paying attention, and you will learn to do that better. Playing tennis, anything like that. But sometimes we forget that the same applies to our thoughts, and our thoughts also make channels in the brain, physical channels in the brain that become thinking habits. And the brain doesn't discriminate between empowering mental models and disempowering mental models. It'll faithfully reproduce them. So this is why I think it's very important to be constantly thinking in terms of what's empowering for you, and to explore and to do new things rather than staying in one place, however comfortable it might be.
Which comfortable brings up that wonderful phrase people are bound to have heard, whether it's NLP, the bound to comfort zones. Get out of your comfort zone. Which obviously links in with fear of failure, fear of success. And I personally believe more people end up stopping themselves from doing things because of they're not consciously aware of it, I don't think, but because of fear of success. Would they be ready for what that would mean to them in life more so than fear of failure? What's your kind of view on that?
Yeah, sure. No, we fear to, as far as the brain is concerned and our subjective experience, it's an away from, isn't it? We feel threatened. There is a threat to us. And because a threat to life and limb is very important during evolution, we've evolved to pay particular attention to threats, because they could be fatal. There's no evolutionary bonus for feeling happy. If you go along feeling happy, you could get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. But if you're always on the alert for any threat, you're likely to survive and pass on to your children. So that's why the emotion of fear is so compelling. It's there to save your life originally, and it's there to show you that there is a threat. Now, unfortunately, the part of your brain, the amygdala, that deals with that isn't very discriminating in terms of different sorts of fears. So you can feel threatened by all sorts of things. Of course, you can feel threatened by someone there looking like they're going to be physically violent, but you can also be threatened by not having enough likes on your Facebook page or whatever it might be, because your reputation or whatever it might be, your values will be threatened. This will make you feel anxious. This will make you feel afraid. So that's one thing. The second thing is our brain is amazing in terms of being able to time travel. So we can put ourselves in imaginary futures, very unpleasant imaginary futures, and feel extremely threatened and fearful and anxious about them while sitting perfectly comfortable in our chair. I used to do it with dental appointments, make a dental appointment, and then about a week before I'd start to think, oh, I've got to go to the dentist, I'll probably have to have a filling, could even be a root canal. Oh my God, the last root canal was terrible, I couldn't stand it. And before long, I would be terrified of something that hasn't happened.
Negative future pacing.
Well, yeah, but it's exactly. But it's future pacing. It's not building castles in the air. It's building dungeons in the air. We can future pace anything, and unfortunately, we often tend to future pace unpleasant things, and then we leave out the second step, which is how can I avoid this? we just jump into it and feel bad, rather than going, okay, well, it's a possibility. It hasn't happened yet. How can I make sure it doesn't happen? But you were talking about fear. So yes, we can fear success, whatever success might mean, and we can fear failure, and we can fear everything in between. So fear in itself is fine. I don't believe in any negative emotions. Fear is there to be helpful. It's just that it can put us in some difficult places unless we are able to manage it in the right way.
Fear loosely, well, I say loosely, it kind of segues nicely into mentioning pain and pleasure, the motivating things, and it kind of doesn't work, or at least in my experience, it doesn't kind of work the way most people who haven't studied it or tried things out would think it would, logically. And by that I mean, some things out there say, oh yeah, your mind's there to always do whatever's going to make you safe, or at least what it thinks is going to make you safe and happy and bring you towards pleasure and away from pain. And yet, in my experience, to get people to actually make a change, certainly therapeutically anyway, may not necessarily be the same in coaching. That's your definite area of expertise. That's what I want to ask, is that we have to really ramp up the pain of what they're currently not doing that they want to do, or rather what they're doing that they want to stop, say it was smoking. We've got to ramp up the pain so they're more likely to stop if it becomes painful than being motivated by the pleasure of saving money, being healthier, ironically. And yet conscious logic says it should be the other way around.
Well, pain is always more motivational than pleasure in a way. You know, it's got to be, because pain hurts you. It can harm you. It could even kill you. So pain is another signal that something's wrong, and you better do something about it. Which is why whatever you're concentrating on, you get a pain, and it is going to distract you. And we are very loss averse, just naturally. Our thinking, our brain is very loss averse. We hate losing much more than we like winning. So you can say, yes, pain is motivational.
But it has to be really ramped up, because, you know, people who want to stop smoking, they decide, I'm using smoking as an example. They might go, yeah, I definitely want to stop. I've got the motivation of health. I'll have more money. I'll smile nice. You could have a list as long as your arm of things that could be classed as pleasurable benefits of stopping, but they don't. And the pet, although they're not feeling so good, they're skinned, people are giving them grief, which are painful things. And each time they have one, they might have got to the point that they're actually not enjoying it as such. But I kind of liken it to the lobster in the frog in the
boiling water.
Yeah.
In the hot water that gradually gets towards boiling, but you don't notice it because it's getting hotter and hotter in degrees. I can't share your enthusiasm for ramping up the pain.
Because if you really ramp up the bloody pain, then boom. I mean, all right, it might be classed as aversion therapy, that, but you know, with changing the pain pleasure switch or whatever, you can make it so that even the thought of a cigarette just so revolts on all levels that that's all they need.
That's another matter. I think there's many things involved here. One is that people will avoid pain. So if you ramp up the pain, they will avoid you. That's the first thing. Yeah. You know what it's like. You can tell people how bad things are going for them, and if they don't stop, then this bad thing will happen, and they'll switch off because they don't like what you're saying. It's painful, so they will avoid it, and they'll say, no, it's not like that. You know, it's something else, and then the rationalizations will start. So I think you've got to be careful about talking about pain like that. I think that certainly pointing out the consequences of not changing is important when you're dealing with a change, right? There's the good things about changing that you want, and there are the bad things that will happen if you don't change. But it's difficult, and especially if you're going to deal with something like smoking, because smoking is a chemical addiction. Nicotine is extremely addictive chemical. It messes with your brain. It hijacks the dopamine pathways, and it's extremely difficult to give up just on a physical basis. So it's something that you've got to deal with a little bit differently when you're dealing with physical addictions, of which nicotine is one, and not just take the psychological point of view. You can, of course, I'm not saying that you have to get some sort of chemical cure for smoking or anything else. It's possible to stop smoking without that. I stopped smoking. I woke up this is many years ago. I woke up one day and thought it was almost like smoking had given me up. I just didn't want to anymore. Whereas all the trying and all the thing about, oh my God, you know, how bad it is for me, blah, 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 didn't stop me at all. But when I was ready, it just happened. It happened overnight, and I stopped. But that I'm not saying that's the way forward. I'm just saying what's happened to me. So with regard to, the pain and pleasure thing, these are built into the brain. They're built into us as human beings, that you either avoid something because it's painful, or you approach something because you believe it's going to be pleasurable. And this leads to wanting, and this of course leads to our goal focus. Although it's important to say that wanting...
About them getting blurred.
You what?
What about them getting blurred?
What getting blurred? Which
Pain
one?
and pleasure. Because we won't go too deep into it, but there's a whole subculture of BDSM, bondage, domination, sadomasochism, where they get pleasure from the pain.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going into that. Certainly, you can get pleasure from all sorts of things.
But the similar situations, I think, happening. I've spoke to, for example, people who worked in the city, in stocks and shares and stuff, where incredibly high pressure situations that aren't particularly good for their stress levels or health, really, and they know this, and that to them, if it was just down to that, they would go and find a different job. But they say they are addicted, if we say that's like the pain of the side effect side, but they're addicted to the highs that they feel when things do go up and they sell at the right time and all this. So you're almost getting the pain and pleasure blurred, confusion in the business arena there.
Well, I think there's, we would be careful about blurring what is pain and what is pleasure. Basically, pain is something that you move away from, and pleasure is something that you move towards, in terms of basic brains and human beings, and that can be all sorts of things. And there's many people in high pressure jobs under a great deal of stress, which is over time chronically going to affect their health in a bad way, but they're okay at the moment. It's the old story, everything's fine until it isn't, basically. I'm okay now, nothing's happened, and I'll continue. And and there's a good deal of reward to that. There's a good deal of pleasure to it, and reward, and a lot of money, and the adrenaline highs and everything else. And great. And you just got to be careful that the cost of that doesn't creep up on you and lead to something bad. And we're not very good at looking in the long term. We don't do well at how do they call it? It's like we want rewards now. We're not very good at waiting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in terms of future punishment, we tend to push the pain or the punishment way into the future. Well, it'll cost me, but that's a long way away. But I want this now. Mm-hmm. So you got these two things going on. And we discount, delay discounting, it's called. So the delay on the pleasure that we want is very difficult to manage, but it's very easy to delay the punishment. That's way into the future. And this goes all the way back to the so-called marshmallow effect of Walter Mischel back many years ago of putting the 4-year-olds in a room with a tasty treat, a marshmallow on the table, and saying, if you can last for 15 minutes without eating that, you'll get 2, and then see what happens. And the ability of those children at 4 to be able to delay satisfaction of eating that marshmallow was a huge predictor to future scholastic achievement, academic achievement, even financial achievement and health. It's amazing. And about a third of them were able to go the 15 minutes. Most of them didn't. And they had some wonderful strategies for trying to avoid it. Some of them would cover their eyes so they couldn't see the marshmallow on the table. And some would take a very small bite out of it and hope that the experimenter didn't notice. And others would try to kind of look around the room at everything else. But this is it, you know, that 4-year-old brain is still there in us somewhere.
How important do you think NLP? It's NLP. The thing about NLP that I don't like is quite often it came up with fancy terms for things that have always kind of existed for ages to make them sound more special than they are. But in NLP, they talk about core values as you know, compared to beliefs and meshing together, kind of in the context of somebody who might say, you know, my goal is I want to be famous in whatever particular field, but because they haven't thought it through properly, what they truly want, they get there, they become famous, and then they realise that, you know, people treat them differently. It also attracts a certain amount of negative attention. There's all these things that they perhaps didn't think about because they didn't have a coach to help guide them. Yeah, what do you help your clients see the bigger picture, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, if people get what they want, then unless you're careful, you either get, is this as good as it gets? You know, oh, I got what I wanted. Well, is this as good as it gets? You know, why don't I feel happy? Or, oh my God, I got what I want and I wish I hadn't, which has been my experience sometimes. You know, it's about the journey, because you can't control the achievement anyway. If the journey is important, and that's more about values, we can set our goals, but really, if we're honest, we're not in control of that. And the metaphor I like is climb Mount Everest, you know. You have a goal to climb Mount Everest, and you may or may not get to the top for all sorts of reasons. Yeah? Things may happen, pandemics may happen, snowstorms may happen, all sorts of things. It's not in your control. Yeah. But what is in your control is the reasons why, and the journey, and the happiness that you feel in doing so as you move towards the top of the mountain, regardless of whether you get to the top. Now, if you get to the top, how long are you going to spend there? 5 minutes? 10 minutes, maybe. Actually, well, before, I saw a wonderful picture in the newspaper a few months ago of a queue of people going to the top of Mount Everest. There was a queue of about 200 yards, you know, up to the top there. So you waited your turn with hardly any oxygen and freezing cold until you could get up there and take a selfie or whatever you do at the top. And then you come down again. Now, you spend 5 minutes at the top. How long do you spend actually climbing the blooming mountain? Months. So you'd better enjoy it, and you better do it for a good reason. And it better be important to you, whether you reach there or not, because it's the journey. It's not the achievement.
It's a very powerful, example. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to segue into mentioning that you also officially are a trainer of micro expressions and the stuff that Paul Ekman has become famous for, and people most likely may have seen the TV show Lie to Me. Or indeed, you may, if you've got kids, you may well have watched Inside Out, the Disney Pixar film, which Paul Ekman advised about how to basically emotional reactions and stuff in. Can you tell us a bit about your work in that area and how it slots into the overall package of what you offer?
Well, I think it's fascinating. I mean, Paul Ekman was originally interested in emotions and emotional intelligence and that kind of field, and he kind of got into the lie detection field through his research about, well, he's famous, of course, for the research about universal facial expressions of emotion. So of course his work on lie detection was pounced on, especially in the aftermath of 9/11. But he was always interested in emotions, and lie detection is about, of course, language and also emotions, because when you misrepresent reality intentionally with a view to misleading someone, then your words will change, and you may well feel some emotional charge about that, maybe guilt or happiness or any sorts of things, and these will leak out, and this is the basis of detection deception. It's a fascinating field. I think it's really interesting, and I've done some work on that. In terms of coaching, what's interesting about it, of course, is the emotional part, which is the facial expressions of emotion. So that when we are when we feel a particular emotion, you don't have to calibrate these. So when someone is feeling frightened, there is a universal expression of fright that doesn't matter who they are or where they come from. You're going to see it. Now, it can be very subtle, and it can be a micro expression. In other words, it can flit across the face in less than 1/5 of a second. So you better be paying attention. This is because emotions in the brain, we don't control them. When we are triggered for whatever reason, the emotion floods out, and this leads to changes in the body. It leads to increased heartbeat, blood pressure, change in skin tone, and change in facial expression. And we're very, very sensitive to faces because they are a communication channel. So faces don't lie in terms of showing what emotion you're feeling. Now, that's not to say that people are trying to tell you lies. I'll give you an example. I was coaching an executive, and they were talking about a barbecue that they'd gone to. It was like a business barbecue. All the other executives were there, and people were having fun. And it was a sunny day, and they were talking with each other. And he was talking about this, and he was saying, it's a very pleasant experience, and he was talking about it as it was a pleasant experience. He was saying it was, and yet every now and again he'd flit across an expression of sadness would go across his face very quickly. Now, so what I do there is I think, okay, so he's looking sad for some reason. Now, I have no idea why. I certainly don't assume that he's lying and that the whole barbecue was a sad experience, because clearly it wasn't. So there's two messages there. One is that parts of it he was happy in. There was something about it that he was sad about, maybe, or he was having some association as he was talking to some sad event in the past that was not in any way connected with that, and that's what led to the facial expression. I don't know. I have to ask. So I did, and I don't go, oh, I caught you in some incongruence. You're really sad here. You go something like, yeah, it sounds like a very pleasant experience, and yet I have this feeling, this idea, this intuition that there was something about it that made you a bit sad. What do you think? Am I crazy? And then he thought for a little while. He said, yeah, you're right. Some of those conversations with other executives at the barbecue did make me feel sad in terms of what was happening to me and the way that the company was going. So then we segued into a conversation about what was happening there, and that was extremely productive. And I'm not sure that he would have gone there if I hadn't given him that opportunity.
A very powerful tool, then.
Absolutely. So we don't have license to rummage in other people's emotional handbags, as Paul Ekman says. But if we see emotion, then I think we can ask about it in a respectful way, being absolutely clear that this is what I perceive, and I've no idea what it's about, and you're perfectly free to deny it or say it's nothing to do with that or anything. But if it is, you have an opportunity to talk about it. So I found that particularly useful in terms of my coaching anyway.
No, it sounds like something that would be very useful to the astute therapist as well, especially
Oh,
anyone who's
sure.
involved in counselling or psychotherapy
Oh,
type stuff.
I think it's absolutely essential, uh, because you'll see these emotions that they're there in the face, and they can't be hidden. Of course, once we're aware of showing an emotion, like we get angry at something, but then we usually smile and stop it. But before that, fifth of a second, if you're watching, this is why when people are doing important interviews, there's two of them. One asks the questions and the other one stays silent and just watches. And then they
Right.
compare notes afterwards, because it's very difficult. It's a big stretch to take in so much information that a human being will give you just in even 1 minute of conversation.
Interesting. I've got to be honest, I just assumed that, because I've never had to have interviews like that, always having been self-employed, but I am aware that people do, have two, sometimes three people on a panel interviewing them, and I figured logically that was just because, they had input between them, they all ran the company or whatever, but what you've just explained makes sense, yeah? If one person's consciously focused on asking the questions and listening to the answers they're getting, they're not going to be aware of what the body language and facial expressions are coming out with to the same degree.
No, it's very difficult. I mean, when I set up exercises in coaching or NLP, I'll give people, you watch the face, you listen to the words, you track the modal operators, you watch the body language, because it's so hard to do all of that.
Yeah.
You can't do it all. So, and then you'll miss information, or you may not get what's important. Whereas if you can spread your senses over 4 or 5 people, this makes learning a lot easier.
Excellent. Well, we're getting very close to the end, so I just want to remind viewers and listeners that below the video, if you're on a video platform where the written description is, go and look in there. If you're on your podcast, look in what they call the show notes, which is below the little speaker symbol, and you will find various website links, including...
And before you go,
Yeah,
I've got to show this.
that's better. Coaching the Brain, which is practical applications of neuroscience to coaching, which you can go and find out more about at coachingthebrain.com. Also, Joseph's site for coaching companies and individuals who can afford his fees, as it were, is lambent.com. That's LAMBENT. But don't worry, the links will be below. Go on Amazon, just type in Josph O'Connor. Boom!
Well, be careful. There is a very fine Irish novelist called Josph O'Connor, and if you type that in, you're liable to get his books.
This is, well, you do, but you get all of yours, but you get 5 of his books, and I had to do extra research. I thought, I'm going to get this right. I'm not going to ask if you've written a novel. And I did some digging, and I've managed to find clarification that it is a different person. But you will get Joseph's NLP books come up. I mean, the easier way, just type in Introducing NLP, Josph O'Connor, and then click on his name on that, and it'll bring up all the rest of his NLP books, of which I have not read them all yet, because I've certainly not read Coaching the Brain. That I will put on the list. But if you've not read any books on NLP, Introducing NLP and Training with NLP are the two that I personally say get first. And then the NLP workbook next, and work through the rest as you can afford them and get them. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute privilege and an honor to speak in person with an individual whose books I've learned a lot from over the years. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Do you prefer John or Jonathan or?
Whichever. I am not, it's a stage name. I'm Alex by birth, but Alex Smith sounds flat when I get introduced at events. Ladies and please welcome live on stage, Alex Smith. It kind of goes, Jonathan Royal. It's got that more showbizy Round of applause.
Much better. My father was an actor, and he knew about, you have a stage name and you have your real name, and it's whatever looks best in lights. Apparently 6 letters and 6 letters looks best if you're going to have it up in lights.
Plus, it's state management, almost like NLP. When introduced on stage as Jonathan Royal, that persona, it's calm, relaxed, Mr. Confident. Alex Smith caught unawares at a party and asked to do a party trick is a bit more, really? Yeah, so.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that whoever is watching will get some enjoyment and
I am sure they will, especially if they go to the links below this video or the speaker and take their study further. Thank you all for watching or listening. Thank you once again, Josph, and
thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.